When our youngest son was 24 years old, he moved back home for a while, for a few months. Now, I know Jesus tells a very touching story about a father who longingly waited for his son to return home. But let's be honest. How many of us parents of adult children have not always found that to be an event for which to throw a party? What was most frustrating to Jean, my wife, and me was how difficult he was to awaken. Soon after he came home, he got himself a job for which he needed to get up by 7:30 every morning. And every morning his alarm clock would go off right at 7:30, and every morning he would sleep right through it. Either Jean or I, one would pound on his door and we would ask, "David, do you know what time it is?" It is a question that we ask of one another quite frequently. Sometimes in a polite tone of voice, "Excuse me, do you know what time it is?" And sometimes with an edge of annoyance or frustration, "Do you know what time it is?" Does anybody really know what time it is? That was the question the group Chicago, you know them? They asked that musically in the early 1970s, followed by an even more penetrating question: does anybody really care? Some folks are really good at time, at keeping time. One of the things I found so amazing about the recent solar eclipse was how, to the very second, accurate were the predictions of when the total eclipse would start and end at every spot on the map. For years, astronomers had said that at 2:37 p.m. on August the 21st, 2017, the total solar eclipse would begin to take place in Anderson, South Carolina, and would end at 2:39 p.m. and some seconds. And sure enough, the moon arrived in its spot in front of the sun at exactly that time.
Amazing.
The Apostle Paul, in Romans 13, that Nancy just read, says that Christians are people who know what time it is. You know what time it is. How it is even now the moment to awaken from sleep. The alarm has gone off, and the temptation is oh so great to reach over and hit the snooze button. The alarm has gone off, and we have to fight the urge to pull those covers back over our heads and roll right back into slumber. The alarm has gone off, and we justify to ourselves just 5 more minutes. Right? The alarm has gone off, and we might even get ourselves up, only to forget why we were up in the first place and simply move from bed to easy chair and fall right back to sleep. Now, I'm not so sure that Paul is not being a little overly optimistic when he says to us Christians, you know what time it is. Do we really know what time it is? And I hate to even think that we would have to ask the follow-up question, do we really care? For the second time, in just a matter of weeks, few weeks, we are glued to television sets and computer screens and smartphones watching the movement of a massive storm, a hurricane bringing severe record-breaking weather. We are still sorting out the full extent of the damage done by Harvey, what was already being called the most expensive weather event in U.S. history. And even as I speak these words, the full fury of Irma is being felt in Florida. And we wonder about impact in our own area, as well as other places, as the storm slowly moves north and west. Most of us here are old enough to remember back 12 years ago when the Lady Katrina showed up in the Gulf of Mexico. We watched her from the time she formed out in the Atlantic and skirted her way across southern Florida until she hit the warm waters. In less time than most imagine, she grew in scope and magnitude to cover almost that entire body of water, the Gulf of Mexico. And on that Sunday, throughout the day, she picked up steam, moving from a Category 1 to a Category 5 storm, packing winds of 155 miles per hour. Calls for evacuation went out, and hundreds of thousands living near the Gulf coastline did exactly that. And the next day, early Monday, the eye of the storm made land about 60 or 70 miles east of New Orleans, Louisiana, and for a brief time, a collective sigh of relief was heard as the most highly populated city of the region escaped the ravages of a direct hit or higher winds which come on the east side of the eye wall. For decades, the doomsday scenario had been discussed. What would happen if a major hurricane were to make a direct hit on New Orleans, a metropolitan area of 1.3 million people, most of whom lived in parts of that city which sit below sea level and are protected by a series of levees, walls that were built to keep the water out? Well, that collective sigh of relief soon turned into a national gasp of horror as the walls failed to hold in some key places. And 80+% of that city, New Orleans, quickly went underwater. What unfolded in the hours and days since the first leak hit the levees was tragically eye-opening to many of us in America and much of the world. Sadly, we did not know what time it was. Even more sadly, as Christians, we did not know what time it was. Now, I cannot and I do not endorse a theology which puts the paintbrush of such a picture of massive, untold suffering into the hands of God. The God I believe in does not want the innocent to suffer. But I also know that in a creation where suffering exists, and we don't always know why, God sends out a wake-up call if we'll listen. During that time of Katrina, as right now, I had a hard time tearing myself away from the television. Perhaps you too felt the weight of the images before you. I didn't want to see them, but could not see them. The danger of such widespread media coverage is that as a people we become overwhelmed and ultimately somewhat desensitized to the suffering. And we start using terms like mass victims and those people and disaster statistics. It's important we never lose sight of individual lives in the midst of this. So God sent a wake-up call in America 12 years ago. Did we know what time it is? Most importantly, God sent a wake-up call to proclaim followers of Jesus Christ. Do we know what time it is? Across America and the world, expressions of shock were heard about the condition which was revealed after Katrina hit, the condition of people's lives right here in the middle of the most affluent, prosperous nation on earth. How is it that in America we can allow people to live in such conditions? That question was asked over and over again. What was sad about that question is we waited for utter devastation to ask it. Do we know what time it is? It is time for followers of Jesus Christ to take up his cross and follow him. It is time that we lay aside values of self-indulgence and take on loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. It is time that we recognize that God's heart breaks when some of his children live in the midst of poverty squalor, while others squalor the earth's resources in the midst of affluent waste. Those reasons, thousands back in New Orleans were left in the storm's path, was not their stubborn refusal to leave necessarily. It was their incapacity to go because they did not own a vehicle or have money to buy the gas or the means to stay in a hotel or family to join. And those conditions did not arise from the storm's destruction. Those conditions arose from a nation that's got its priorities wrong. When we allow favor of the rich to take school books and medicine and decent housing and crime-free streets and community infrastructure from the poor. We have found our most vulnerable lying in a bed that we all have made. Do we know what time it is? It's time we raise up an army of compassion. And we cannot and should not expect government to be the only soldier in that army. But we can and should expect government's priority to be the support of that army of compassion. Yesterday, I was on my way back from dropping some stuff off at the recycling center, which in and of itself is always a reminder of how much stuff so many of us have that we have to find creative ways to get rid of. I was coming down the road and I heard a horn sound playing Willie Nelson's On the Road Again. Pulling out of a private residence came this customized travel coach, a megabus. It was a megabus. Tiger paws flapping in the breeze from all four corners. I assumed it was the game day vehicle. And I also assumed it was probably only one of many types of vehicles of equal or greater size and value that would be parked around Death Valley in parking places somebody paid thousands of dollars to have. To attend a 3-hour game whose tickets cost I don't know how much. Now, I'm not trying to rain on anybody's tailgate parade or party, okay? But it was just a reminder to me that when in this land of great blessing we live, we hear folks say, or we ourselves say, there's just not enough. There's just not enough. There's not enough. There's not enough resources to help everybody. When we say that, it is a lie. There is enough. God has given us more than enough. We don't have a supply problem. We have a distribution problem. And I wonder to myself how many of us would be willing to curtail our energy use, or eat out a few less times a week, or even once in a while forego a football game, if it meant in some way those resources could be used to help someone else. We often hear the phrase, God helps those who help themselves, as if it were a scripture verse in 2 Romans. There is no 2 Romans. More accurate to the message of Jesus and to the scriptures is this saying, God helps those who help others. God helps those who help others. Amen. Do we know what time it is? It is time we raise up an army of compassion to serve the needs of others, but also to build relationships between those of us who live well protected and those who fall through the cracks of an ever-weakening social safety net. We need not only to be giving fish to the hungry, but we need to find creative ways to go fishing with the hungry and teach them how to fish. Thus is the mission of South Main Chapel and Mercy Center. Do we know what time it is? It is time for us to make love a priority. Let us stop squabbling about whose religion or politics is right or best, and let us put love first, even if it means our having to give up a few things. Amen. Let us quit squabbling about who gets to sit in the best seat at the family table, or whose job is most important, or who's worked the hardest, and let us put loving God and loving each other first. Amen. Paul says we cannot afford to waste a minute, must not squander these precious daylight hours in frivolity and indulgence, in sleeping around, in bickering and grabbing everything in sight. Do we know what time it is? Sometimes the wake-up call comes in the national tragedy of a hurricane. Sometimes it comes in more personal and individual ways. Illness strikes suddenly, swiftly, and too often we find ourselves standing at the funeral home before we realize how much time we wasted and what opportunities we lost while holding bitterness in our hearts. Do you know what time it is? It is time for forgiveness and healing and moving on. Do we know what time it is? As God's people, it is our calling to know that it is time for us to put on the nature and character of Jesus. It is time for us to believe in the preeminence of love for one another and neighbors throughout the world. We can put on the snooze alarm, and we can pretend that the warming of the Earth's oceans as a result of the increased burning of fossil fuels is not having an impact on our weather, but in reality it is. The storms, without doubt, are getting stronger and bigger and more destructive.
Yes.
While there may have been days in the past when the self-made man or woman and everyone looking out for themselves and the promotion of individual wants over community needs worked, there may have been a time when that way of living worked. But in this new day and in this environment, it does not work so well. We can either make it in this world together, working together, caring for each other, respecting one another, sharing with each other, or we won't make it at all. In other words, we can live the way God created us to live and has always meant for us to live, loving Him and loving each other as we love ourselves, or we can watch life on our planet perish. That's what time it is. The hour is upon us. God has given us the choice. Let's pray. Remove the blinders from our eyes, Lord. Let us look at that which measures time. Let us look at the world around us and events occurring. Let us look into the eyes of those who are suffering and realize what time it is. It's time to live your way. The way you created us to live. It's time for us to follow your pathway. A world where we look out for each other. A world where no one needs to go completely without because there's plenty enough for all. A world where we don't let bitterness and anger tear us completely apart and keep us forever separated, but we practice forgiveness and mercy, just as you have forgiven us and shown us such incredible mercy. That's our prayer today, Lord. And even as we pray,